untimely death and his poor economic planning meant that at the age of 25, she was an impoverished widow with 5 children. The stories had to be woven to sustain her, to create a cushion on which to land as her real status plummeted. Throughout my childhood, I was fed this ancestral myth that still remains fixed for many of my generation of Maliks. It is a sort of private family madness. The story of the tea growing cold is still told by people who were born years after the original fable was made up. It is a fantasy, but a harmless one. I grew up in a household and culture swaddled in such myth. The first, most important foundational story was of a Malik family rooted not just in wealth, but in the honor, grace, and quiet nobility of its women. It took a long time for me to realize that this was a trick. If the women focused on being comely and composed all the time, they would never focus on the fact that they were deeply unhappy and limited in their freedoms. It took even longer for me to recognize all the ways history, society, and family had leveraged this flattering sense of relative superiority to ensure that we, as women, did not only not question subordination, but competed at suffering it with perfect self-composure. The cultural myths that we believed in imbued us with such a sense of exceptionalism that, even as our fortunes declined, we carried on with the same belief in our supremacy, never trying to understand why we weren't thriving, never even acknowledging that we weren't. Several family members, intent on amassing the wealth they were born to think they were owed, racked up huge sums of debt to fund business enterprises, lived the high life, then were promptly marched to the debtor's jail. The myths had made us blind to our faults. Blinded by entitlement, we never questioned ourselves. Even as we gradually succumbed to bankruptcy, eviction, and public humiliation, the family remained pugnacious and scornful of others. So I ran away and moved to the UK before the myths consumed what was left of me. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that my departure was akin to leaving a cult. I was punished for my departure with the threat of family excommunication and endured long periods of bullying by aunts and uncles. My mental health took such a knock that I almost gave up and went back. When my resistance to family pressure almost crumbled, a friend intervened and stopped me from taking any more calls from home. Once I gained a footing in my new home, the initial sense of relief, euphoria, even as I enjoyed simple, basic freedoms after a life suffocated by narcissism and denial, soon melted away. I had naively built an idealistic image of a West where, sure, things weren't perfect, but where the basics, as far as social justice was concerned, had been ironed out, or at least where attempts to iron them out were ongoing. I was not prepared for all the ways my new home was different, but also the same as the one I had just left, with a different sort of tribalism, a different manifestation of misogyny, a codified economic system of injustice. The sexism, in particular, was overwhelming as well as pernicious. Here I was again, the idiot, with my treasure map. Here were all the myths again, deluding the larger Western civilization into thinking everything was fine as it slipped into decline. Here were all the myths again, telling us that the West in general, and Anglo-Americanism in particular,